The illegitimacy. Today, illegitimacy doesn't matter very much. Not all that long ago, a young woman who got herself into an interesting condition could often face the door of her own house slammed in her face, and her own father telling her never to darken the doorstep again. Luckily, that's all gone. But in 11th century Normandy, it was a very, very serious business indeed. The most important thing in the world was land, and you had to have your title to that land secured beyond any possible doubt or challenge. And the way to do that was to prove that your father had married your mother. So that succession could be proved, you would have continuity, you would have security. Medieval Europe lived in a state of far greater insecurity than we do today. What do we know about the country he conquered? Frankly, not very much. Name 3 facts about England in the 11th century. You might know it was ruled by somebody called Edward the Confessor. True, but I bet you don't know why he was called Edward the Confessor. Do you know about the old countries of England? Do you know, if I said the word to you, heptarchy, would it mean anything? In fact, it means the land of the 7 kingdoms. Heptarchy comes from a Greek word meaning 7, based on the early conquests of the Saxons. As you well know, the South Saxons settled in what became and is Sussex, the East Saxons Essex, the West Saxons Wessex, and so on. Curiously, we do not have a county of Nossex. We don't know what happened to the North Saxons, if indeed there were any. They used the word shire, so that much would have been familiar to you. In fact, the man in charge of the shire produces another word which you're extremely familiar with for another reason. A man put in charge of a farm or an estate was known as the reeve. So a man put in charge of a shire was known as a shire reeve. Carry that on for a few decades, allow for people's laziness and pronunciation, and shire reeve becomes sheriff. Sheriff was the chief executive officer in a county in England in the 11th century. As you well know, sheriff means something completely different in America. So we know a little bit, well, I've just told you a little bit about the shires, about the counties, but you would be making a mistake if you thought of England as one single country. Now, geographically, of course, it was. But culturally, demographically, to use a long word, it wasn't. Why? Because of the invasions of the Vikings from the 8th century onwards. As you well know, at least I hope you do, King Alfred made his reputation defeating the invading Danes. Being not only a warrior, but a very shrewd statesman as well, he tried to provide for the future by arranging that there should be no more wars. So he did what the King of France did to the Normans. He gave them some land. He signed a treaty which allowed the Danes to settle in the area of England which they had already been trying to conquer, the north and the east. And he allowed that Danish law should run in these particular counties, hence the word Danelaw. That was the area of England where Danish law applied and where the customs were Danish, where a large slice of the population were Danish or descended from Danes. So England was not exactly 2 countries, but there were 2 clearly defined sections of it. All right, there was intermarriage, there was trade, a gradual merging the one into the other, but they still had separate personalities. And that applied in 1066. So you didn't know that. You didn't know about the old countries. How much do you know about the culture of England in the 11th century? Not much, I don't suppose. Neither do I. And certainly neither did the Normans. They were going to somewhere about which they knew very little indeed. They probably didn't have much idea of how big it was. And they certainly didn't have much idea about the population. Have you any idea how many people lived in England in 1066? Now, there are about 60 million. In 1066, so far as we can judge, there were less than 2 million, 1/30th of what we've got now.